Turn those off. We'll begin our meeting with the invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance. If you would please bow your heads and we'll just pray sitting down here, or do you want to stand up?
Most boards stand up, some sit down.
Let's stand up. We got to stand up in a minute anyway.
All right. Our Heavenly Father, we want to thank you for bringing us all here together. We want to thank you for our health and the joyous weather that we have outside today, Lord. We want to ask that you give us a spirit of working together and a spirit of loving acceptance of the opinions that other people have, Lord. We thank you for all these things and the things we don't see. And in your Son's name we pray. Amen. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which was against one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas.
Save under God, one and indivisible.
All right, item number 3. Do we have any comments from the public? Anyone here?
My name is Jade Olivier, and I'm here from Commissioner Nowak's office. So I will be the liaison moving forward between y'all and Commissioner Nowak. So we're seeing a lot more of me as we progress. Ms. Shelley has all my contact information if you guys shall need it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have been, is it Cornwell? Conley. Okay.
I live in West High Oaks. I met Deetra the other day when I was paying my water bill. And I told her that I'm a certified TCQ instructor for water and wastewater. And she said there's some kind of mentoring program or something like that that's going on.
That's with TAWWA.
That's with it?
TAWWA.
Okay, so that's, okay. I showed up anyway, so I'm in the residence, so. I'm
Okay.
going to go back.
All right. Thank you for showing up, Ben. Anyone else? Okay, item number 4. Do we have any requests? Okay, very good. Like that. All right. Item 5 through 8, consent agenda. Does anyone have anything to say? Okay, can I get a motion?
Motion, we accept the consent agenda.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Item 9, review of the district's draft fiscal year 2024 operating budget and recommended water rate structure.
I'll point you to a couple of documents. First one was the draft memo budget, which summarizes the budget, which is the spreadsheet. And on the back. And then third item looks like this, which is related to the water rates. We'll talk about it in a minute. Just to go over some of the highlights of the budget, the anticipated revenue for next year would be $14,789,000 and change. For the expenses at $14,801,000, resulting in a net gain of $788,711. That's the good news. The Woodlands administration fee is going down from $718 to $7. You can see a decrease there in the budget. On the budget itself, so as you know, your tax rate creates revenue that goes in on the revenue side as well as water rates. And then on the expense side, we go through in the 10 area, those are the purchase services expenses. Those are water, sewer, drainage, repairs, maintenance, things like that. Any capital projects, if there are any, that would go through. You have a share of Bear Branch that is there. Let's see, we also have obviously water distribution increases and sewer repair with the sewer project, the sanitary sewer rehabilitation project. That's also within the 10 section on the back. All in all, if you look at the very bottom of the page two, you look at that bottom number. The 2.2 starts at 2.2, goes to 3.6. That's something that we look at very closely. That is your months of budget coverage. Right now, this budget would contemplate you ending the year next year at about 3.6. We're really working towards with the districts to get that closer to 9 or 12. That's the more industry standard. With as much infrastructure renewals we have coming down the pipe over the next decade or so, we would need to encourage us to try to work on that. Certainly, it's dangerously low right now at 2.6 or 3. So something to keep an eye on. Obviously, tax rates affect it, and so do water rates. But that's the budget side of things. I wanted to give you some information on the water rates. WWA has never done a water rate analysis. Last time that retail water rates increased was 2014. We hired a consultant. The consultant is here. Nelisa Hedden is here today. She's the consultant that we hired to do the water rate analysis, and is an extremely robust spreadsheet of almost 700 pages worth of data, from my understanding. A copy of the executive summary is on the Google Drive if you want to see it. But if you'd like, Nelisa is prepared to talk to you a little bit about what went into that analysis and what went into the rate study, if you'd like.
What's the summary of the Google Drive? Is there a name in that file or?
It's in the budget document folder.
Budget document folder?
I have a question, in comparing the typical residential, monthly water bill for MUD 46 to the one for all of the Woodlands, the total change is 5.6 for the total Woodlands, but it's 9.2 for 46. What's the reason for that?
Is your financial situation?
Our financial situation is not that bad. I don't understand. Are we trying to build up reserves?
You should be. Yes.
Well, we're retiring debt in 6 or 7 years, all of our debt, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so let me take a step back. For our budget, would it be worthwhile to include CIPs as a separate page that would attach to this, so we could see on a monthly rolling basis what the impact of our capital improvement projects are and see how they fit within the budget to be able to avoid this underfunding issue that you're alluding to?
Yeah, probably not on a monthly basis, but certainly I would recommend you look at either a 5 or a 10-year CIP. That way you know what you're on your expense size, particularly on the bigger ticket items that we might be facing down the road, that we know what those are and we can plan for them, or at least put them on it creates kind of a roadmap for you for if you want to look at a multi-year outlook.
I think
on
that's
CIP.
the right way to do things.
Sure, I agree.
How does the board feel?
I think you're right.
Yeah, I think
Should
you're
have
right,
a
too.
5-year plan.
How do we put this into an actionable item for the next meeting?
I think we just have to ask.
They
Just,
do it.
yeah,
Would you please do it?
yeah. Now, we can vote on that if you want to vote on it,
Done
but
for this budget cycle. Sure, it takes months to do, so we'll do it next year or throughout between now and next year for your next budget cycle.
can you provide Fred with some drafts or whatever?
Well, right now, your next year's expected capital expenses are in this,
Are included?
Yes.
Okay.
so it would really be for the following years anyway.
So you have a major potential expense coming to us sometime in the future, something like about $1.5 million from Wood Forest. And we ought to have some estimate, whether you put it out at 4 years or something, and have some plan for paying that off.
Precisely. And,
I
I
don't know what that plan is,
nor do I, but I think with taking a look at our debt being retired within a short period of time, relatively, 6, 7 years, and looking at the expenses coming down, there's possibly a way to balance that from a cash flow perspective. I don't know because I don't have the data. But the more information we have on anticipated expenses, especially CIP, the better we can forecast the M&O budget, and the debt budget's fixed. So I think it's probably,
So one thought is we have a chunk of cash left at the end of the plan for the debt service.
yes.
Can that money be utilized, Brian?
I'm just talking with the financial guy to answer the question, no doubt. Yeah.
So we have some potential extra cash out there in the debt service fund. Can that be used?
After the debt's been expired.
After the debt's been expired.
Yes.
Of course.
Yes.
So to talk about, to put that in context to what Dave and I have been looking at, cash flow, the infrastructure that we've got, how the replacement or the repair only. It seems to me that we're not in financial hardship. We have a flashing amber light that we've got a low coverage, but it's not egregious, in my opinion. I mean, 3 months, 4 months almost is not terrible. So,
We use up quite a bit of chunk of cash in October, and it drops us from 3 to whatever it is, 2.5, 2.
Right. What did we use for October? Was that the Bear Branch payment?
Bear Branch and the SJRA,
Oh, the debt we have with SGRA.
right?
That's, I thought that was paid on a monthly basis
Well, there's 145,000,
for the year. No,
Yeah.
more than a year. It's
145,000 in October. Oh, Bear Branch Dam, I guess.
that's the Bear Branch Dam.
Yeah.
Well,
227 going to the what is it, 136 project? 67.
You also have debt that's expiring over the next year. It's not on this sheet. And it's probably 400,000 a year. And that will expire between now and either 2030 or 2031. And that's from the, that's payments as a result of the sixth accounting. So that's in there too, that will slowly, it's really more like a step function, meaning once we hit the 2030, the wastewater or the water goes away. And the following year, another big hunk of it goes away. And
Talking about debt.
it's what it is, it's the way they funded the $168 million to pay for the Woodlands infrastructure.
For the capacity.
For the capacity, right, for the capacity. They opted to have the River Authority sell the bonds and then pass the principal and the debt payment service back to us into our budget. And so that's sitting there, and that's when it says, if you look on our budget, it says loan. I don't have the current budget. You can see what it is. It's pretty flat. You see what the 362 though, so it's 3, 4, over $500,000 a year between those two. So that one ends in 30, one ends in 31, which is about the same time that a lot of this debt ends, right? 30. So we have, two debt streams that are expiring as we get to 2030. One on the sheet of paper from Aaron, and the other one that's in the budget. And there, if you look at I have the payments by year for this. If you look at that, there is a step down about at the midway point. I just don't recall the top of my head. But that step
2026. I have last year's budget for 146 plus the debt draft worksheet that was done. So I have all of the details to that. And we basically, between 23 and 24, we're reducing debt almost $800,000. And going into the following year.
Yeah, wait a minute. So you're saying you're reducing debt by $800,000.
I could put it differently. It's beginning fund balance as of June 30th of each fiscal year.
What I'm asking
When
is,
you're looking up there, you're looking at the cash flow, and that's a pro forma of the district debt service obligation that we need to make debt service payments by the levy of unlimited tax, right? Right. What David is talking about is the district share of obligations on bonds that are issued by.
Or SJRA.
Part of your operating budget,
Okay,
which is different debt service
Yes, it is
obligations. but
different.
Obligations nonetheless.
right. But
Some of them cross over.
they do cross over. They
Well,
don't never cross over.
so
Yeah, they don't.
the bonds that David's referring to was to buy capacity to expand the system to serve new development. And it's more efficient at the time to have one bond issued as opposed to 7 or 8 separate mini bonds issued. So that's how it flows across on your balance sheet or on your budget. It's just line items of expenses for the water capacity loan and wastewater capacity loan. That's how you'll see it.
And one of them expires in 2030, one expires in
Yeah,
2030.
yeah.
I'll say that.
So there's a
About that.
period there in the future where we'll be really well off. But between now and 2030, we need to improve our position.
Well, I think we need to get the CIP plan. I mean, last year when we discussed this, at
Right.
the end of that discussion, I asked Mike, I said, take me around and show me things that we need to repair. And, you know, his comment was, oh, we're all too new to have any of those problems. So if we need to do, and I'm saying I recognize the discussion we've been having about vision-based testing. I think we need to begin looking at the same thing and developing a skill set.
It helps us make better decisions.
It helps make a better decision. That's right.
That's all we're looking for. And when you take a look at how we're bringing down debt, this is now your memo, okay? It's clear that it's going to all be retired in relatively short order. So the question is, do we need to reissue new debt at some point in time, whether it's revenue or whatever the case might be? Or do we take a different approach that David's kind of been looking at and investigating, and know that the SGRA has been investigating too, about do we replace the entire infrastructure for 46? Or do we do it on a piecemeal basis? And you two have been talking. So, the question is, the more we know about cash flow and finances, the better we are in making that decision, I think.
So just to add to that, so, we've had discussions about the 8 versus 3.5% growth and non-growth. So we've got that information, and it looks like we're in a non-growth status now. Because one of our, the Hughes Corporation dropped the number of SFDUs they want roughly in half. So we have one sitting, slightly below 95, one sitting slightly above, but if you meet on one, you meet on both. So basically, we're in a 3.5% cap now. So if you look at the budget that Eric put together, it has us consuming that 3.5%. So really, the budget that he's presented has a 3.5% increase in rates to meet the numbers on that piece of paper.
Mhm.
So if you look at the change
3.5% increase in revenue.
in rev from our taxes, and
Right.
we're a lot. So if you look at that number, right, and you say that's it, that's all we can raise via the tax rate, I believe,
On the M&O side.
on that side. And we really, we're going to have a slight increase in maintenance in the M&O line, the maintenance line. So really, we don't really have a lot of leeway in the tax rate change. We're at 3.5%. If you look at the budget, at least I looked at it, and you can say, okay, I want to go down to 2%. Well, I don't think that's where we want to go. I think we should all look at that and discuss that next week. But the 3.5% is where we're sitting. And in order to go beyond that, we have to have the voter approval. So we're kind of in that.
We wanted to have that.
We wanted to have that.
Yes, this is something that's a good thing. It's not bad news.
So we've looked at the no growth and growth numbers, and it now indicates we're in the no growth mode. And so I think if we're going to do something, we have the debt retiring, right? And there'll be, I guess what you said, I don't know how much cash it is each year, but I think I'm comfortable with, I just saw this, so I think that's something we have to mull over. But there is some cash freed up every year because we pay back, 5 or 6 million of the debt, and that lowers the interest rate. So you have a little bit of there.
Yeah, your debt service obligations in total annually on average till the end of the structure, about $7.9 million a year.
here, and that goes down slightly each year, right?
And actually, the high year is actually last year, we have 8.6 million.
Okay, so
I mean, the interest component is less.
it's less each year, so
The total.
there's a teeny bit there. And the rest of it comes through water rate changes.
So I have a question for you and Fred. I understand y'all had a meeting with Eric and sort of a mini budget workshop, and I'm wondering what y'all's take on that was. Is this budget good in y'all's mind?
I think the word workshop is probably a little strong.
Whatever you
We
wanna call
reviewed it and discussed it, and I think, what I came away from in discussion with Eric and looking at the numbers is that, when we talk about 3.5%, that's what he proposed, that's the maximum. And I don't have them, I don't remember the exact number, but it's the net change for individual houses into dollars.
Yeah.
It's in the
Yeah.
dollars.
Small.
And so I don't think, I think the budget is tight. He's not proposing much increase in reserves, right? I mean,
I think it's a prudent budget.
That's a good word, Fred.
Yeah, it's prudent. We're doing the right thing
So
for
we did see.
So let's,
Now, there are a few
This
things.
is important though to hear,
yeah,
we can,
I think we're all on the right track here, that the budget is reasonable. And we have a month to discuss it
correct.
and look at it.
That's right.
So let's just receive it, and we have a month to scrutinize it, and then we'll vote on it next month. All right, let's move on.
I'd like to hear about the water.
Yeah.
rate.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Melissa Fenton. I am a consultant who specializes in water and wastewater rate studies. So I'm the bad guy that everybody calls in once in a while. So that being said, I have the pleasure of working with your staff and performing a cost of service and rate design study for Woodlands water for all 10 districts. I'm going to give you a really high level view, and we can get into any questions you may have. The overall process is a 4-step process. Our first step is to establish what we call revenue requirement. Revenue requirements are simply defined as the revenue we need to get out of your water and wastewater rate study to allow you to operate. What we start off with in developing those revenue requirements is we start off with your 2024 budget. We take a historical look, make sure that that budget is prudent and reasonable, and then we make some adjustments off of that. The primary adjustment we made off of that budget is looking at your repair and maintenance expenses, because they do kind of fluctuate from one year to the next. So in making projections of future repair and maintenance expenses, we actually just took an average of a 6-year historical period for right now. We'll come back to that statement in just a moment. But we put that average in for the purposes of this year's rate design. The other major adjustment that came off of that was to build reserves. As was mentioned, your reserves are low in comparison to industry standards. Industry standards is 6 to 12 months, with kind of the sweet spot in there is a 9-month reserve. Why do we have that? Why do we ask for that? That is for a couple reasons. First of all, just general fluctuations in weather. A wet summer can throw you off tremendously. So 3 months at least is just to cover weather fluctuations. The rest is bump in the night stuff. These are things that can happen, go wrong. You have a line break, you have something significant happen that gives you some cash to pay for the repair. So you can just keep continuing safe and reliable operations for your utility. We looked at your reserves, and it was stated they were low. So we put in a plan to build those reserves over in a 5-year period of time. So we added a little bit into the revenue requirements to allow you to do that. Now let me address a couple of things. We talked about future debt service retirement and capital improvement plan. So my experience is that there are a couple of things. First of all, it's in a 7 and 8 year time period, which is beyond kind of where we're looking right now. We've got to focus on the next 5 years of what you've got to do. That being said, when you look at your debt service requirements, the first phone call I would make is these guys and ask them, well, what is in the long range planning for them? What's coming up in 10 years that could impact that? And they typically will have that. And we'd want to look at that and go, okay, if we're retiring debt in 7 years, is there a planned issuance? Is there planned additional projects that you need to be prepared for? The second element was referred to was a capital improvement plan. Ultimately, what we'd like to see happen is to have a capital improvement plan, not just on the SJRA side of things, but also on the district side. Do you have lines that need to be replaced? How often? What are the condition of your project or of your capital items? And when do you anticipate them needing some rehab, rehabilitation, replacement? Usually what would happen is you would have anticipated timing for those projects as well as a cost associated with it. When we get to that point, then we do some long range financial planning. So we take those items, we put it in and say, okay, if we know that in 3 years from now, you're going to have a significant line replacement, then we need to start putting in a plan to be able to pay for those things. So right here today, we're recommending an adjustment to your rates, which was in a 9% range. Keep in mind a couple of things. We haven't changed rates in 9 years. That's the first thing and most significant point here. In this inflationary environment for a utility to have held steady for 9 years is quite frankly remarkable. It's something for your district to be very proud of. So when you look at the annualized look of what you're proposing, it's a very low annual increase. So that's the first thing. That being said, once we have your revenue requirement developed, our next step in the plan and in the study is to functionalize our costs. To understand what functionalization is, this is a term the American Water Works Association uses. We have to understand how we build a water utility. We build water utilities with a certain amount of extra capacity to handle times of peak demand. It's built for all this peaking in the summer when everybody's irrigating. There's a cost impact to maintaining that extra capacity. And what the functionalization does is identifies that cost. We break our costs into 3 categories. The first is called base cost of service. Our base costs of service are essentially the cost of meeting the average daily demands on the utility. If we all got to live in a bubble world and we never had to peak, this is what your average cost would be. The second cost is extra capacity cost of service. And this is the cost of meeting peaking demands on the system. The third are customer costs, cost of your customer service representatives, billing, etc. Once we have a cost into those 3 categories, we then start allocating those costs to classes of customers. We typically use 3 classes of customers, and that's what we used in this case, which is residential, commercial, and irrigation. I believe those are appropriate classes of customers for the Woodlands based off of your customer base. We allocate the base cost of service on their pro rata share of average daily demands on the system. Extra capacity cost of service, we look at each customer class's individual peaking on the system and we allocate them their pro rata share of that peaking. Finally, customer costs of service are allocated on a pro rata share of total customer count. Then we get to a total cost for each customer class that we're trying to recover. From there, we design rates to recover those costs. That's a very high level overview of the process. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
So this builds us up from our coverage of 2 point whatever to 3.6.
Yes, sir. In the 1 year.
So if you look at our mud, so I see this is for residential. Is there a like sheet for commercial? So we did
Typical residential.
typical residential. Okay.
Yeah.
A commercial is very small. That's what I thought. The next thing, oh, go ahead, Fred.
No, please.
Next thing you mentioned was, we have to basically reserve assets and reserve revenue. I'll say that for capacity. You know, we're not a wholesale or retail seller. So we, in essence, we've reserved, haven't we reserved capacity with the ESSER already through the sixth and final? We kind of, we don't change our capacity. It's really,
Right, so, but they built their
They will.
system will allow you to do that peaking. And so their system is built like that to.
right,
allow
their
for
system is
peaking.
built, so that cost has
Yes.
been paid for. It doesn't really change, does it?
Well, the cost of the water purchase that you all are purchasing is part of that cost. And
It's
so,
built into that, is what you're
yes,
saying.
yes, sir.
Okay.
For instance, the base rate for the retired lady that never goes above 3,000. That's why they have a lower rate versus the ones that are really eating into that peak,
Right.
have a little bit higher rate. That's essentially the result.
Okay, so let me tag along on what you're talking about right now, on that rate structure. Was that just an arbitrarily constructed structure, or did you use mathematical algorithms to maximize your income?
Sure, so you do use algorithms. We do look at, there's a balance between your base rate and your volumetric rate. First thing we want to do with our base rate is we want to recover at least half of your debt service through your base rate. That gives you some revenue stability. So we look at your SJRA capacity loans, and we want to make sure that we have at least half of that coming through your base rate. We also want your customer cost of service to come through the base rate as well, because it doesn't matter how much water you use, it costs the district the same to bill you and to send you bill and that piece of it. So those are part of the base rate. The volumetric rate, there is a balance of policy and costs. So we look at a tiered rate structure. And the reason for the tiered rate structure is a couple things. First of all, it's industry best management practice in this day and age to have a tiered rate structure. That encourages an efficient use of water. It also, in the example Eric just gave, it allows the person who's not peaking to have a more reasonable cost than that person who's using those big peaks or spikes in the demand. And the larger users, they're the ones who are really putting that cost on the system. The other policy thing it does is it does allow the little old lady who's living in the apartment, who's just making ends meet, a lifeline rate. It allows them to have a lower cost of service versus if you blended it and you would have a higher.
But that's based on usage.
Yes, yes.
And for the high users, they pay the same rate.
The high users pay a tiered rate structure. So the more water you use, the more you pay. So it's sort of like taxes.
Right.
The first 3,000 gallons are at the lowest rate. The next 7,000 are the next rate, so on and so forth.
And has that, I was leading you somewhere and Eric's answering the question.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. So does this increase based on consumption, I'll call it a consumption, is that fully burdened with the cost of actual operations, or is it merely a tier that has been either arithmetically or arbitrarily established? Where I'm going with this, and what I'd like your thoughts on, is high usage customers, especially in the high retail areas and residential, the apartment houses. Obviously, they wear through the system, they have higher usage, and it's being addressed with this number. But is that truly compared to what the actual operating costs are? And are we making, I'm gonna use the wrong word, enough profit to cover that along with the deterioration of our infrastructure to help rebuild it over time?
Sure, great questions. So first of all, on the tiers we look at every time, we look at your actual usage, we look at them in 5,000 gallon increments. And I look at the percentage of usage within each of those tiers to identify whether or not the tiers are reasonable and logical. So if there's a big outlier or something like that, we found that your tiers are reasonable and make sense based on just kind of industry.
Makes sense as in full coverage or fully burdened cost basis.
So
Got it.
as presented there, they're for fully burdened cost basis.
Good. That's what I was hoping to hear. Thank you.
My pleasure. Any other questions?
Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you do have questions,
Okay,
Okay, that's what I said. You have a business card, but we just,
they know how to find
we'll
me.
talk to Eric.
all right.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks.
All right, let's move on to item number 10. Consider the adoption of a resolution concerning the developed district status 2023. Is that the project you guys have been working on? Okay.
We actually have the proposed somewhere. It's in my stack of papers here. Here it is. We have that worksheet completed.
Do we have enough? for
I
every-
I only brought 20 pounds of paper with me. I didn't bring all my notes.
I'll tell you what, since on the agenda, it just says to consider the adoption. It doesn't say to act on it. Can we make copies of this and distribute it to the board?
That form. That what that is?
That's what that is.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we need to look at this, so can we get a copy of this and we'll put it on next month's agenda?
What is this? So
I
what do you
can take
think
a copy of it now.
We needed to just our status.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Tax rate we're about to.
okay. Let's,
Correct. Right,
Yeah.
and that covers all, because that's partially what we had with that meeting with Eric last week. And that was covered, I thought covered well, so. We got what we were looking for, we protected our constituents, and kudos to the board for doing it.
yeah, good job.
I mean, basically, I have a form in front of me, but it takes you through the mathematical calculation from a tax rate standpoint. And it tells us, how much we can raise taxes to keep the low to 3.5.
Can you give the board just a quick synopsis of what you did and, in 1 minute or less? Is it
I
possible?
can't do it in 1 minute or less, so you
Well,
can.
I can go through the.
Minute and a half.
We met with a consultant they have who maintains this database on developed and undeveloped properties. And, the Hughes Corporation was involved with that. So what we did was we discussed those property and it's about 18 of them that we have identified. The list was before 7. It kind of grew to 18. And then there was a discussion about those properties. And I think that, and we talked about this last month, that the unknown property was kind of up here by the Mitchell Library. And so from that sheet that you saw last month, they had to make a correction and they split that property behind Mitchell Library into 2 sections. And those 2 sections are the part that's in our mud and the part that's available for an annexation based on a future plan of use conservation. And they adjusted that, and with that, they adjusted the SFDUs. And so as a result of that, the
The
document.
annexation is something that we're gonna need to consider and evaluate in the next
Right.
fiscal year. It's not something to do immediately.
What you got from the discussion with Hughes is that, and you can see this from a business standpoint, their plans are fluid. Because they don't know what tomorrow's business condition, they don't know who's gonna come to them and express a need for something. And so they have a thought process that's kind of like this. And then as businesses approach them, it shrinks down to reality. And so what you say the change was they went back and reevaluated their properties and their requirement for SFDU shrunk. And that brought us to the 95, below the 95%, above the 95%, not over 95% developed. So now we're at 3.5.
So now we've just changed status and developing to develop.
Right, this is really a tax calculation sheet. That's how I looked at
It's a
it.
guideline that the.
Guidelines, so it takes you through a worksheet which lays out your ability, how much room do you have to affect taxes? And it comes down to really average dollars per household. And so this is what this sheet is. It's probably a government form. And it tells us how we can set the rate, the top and the bottom.
It's a guideline to calculate tax rates. but I think,
Calculate the rate, and this is
really good counsel.
this is based on the 3.5. And so if you look over that and study it for a while, you can kind of see the change in property value that we can, the tax value we can get. And so, if we have to have, I kind of thought it had to be done this month. And
So, yeah, so the first step is item 10, which you have to make a decision on your developed district status, which sounds like y'all under that includes a motion to memorialize the adoption of that resolution that we're at 3.5. And based on that 3.5, that's when it flows into the spreadsheet that they can.
Well, item 10 is consider and act.
Adoption.
let me ask one question before we do that. So just so we understand this. So let's say a developer comes and says, hey, I'm gonna build this, fancy new building. and I need 2,000 more SFDUs. When presented with that opportunity, right, and it takes us, below the 95% point, we would then have another option to vote to go back to 8%.
Yep.
But until
It's an annual.
it's an annual consideration, but what we can't do, right, is that we can't decide, it's too inconvenient being at 3.5. Let's just go back to 8. We
Yeah.
cannot do that. I mean, so when we were now, gonna vote to be at 3.5, and we have to have what I call an economic event happen that increases the demand that gets us back below that 94% to get to 8%.
That's correct.
So I'm a little bit of an engineer.
Right,
And so I looked at this form that we were given back in May. And in that form, we were asked to approve an environment where we said that the fully built out level was 9,091 single family homes or equivalent. Right. And now, if I understand the numbers right, we're going down, we're saying that number is 8,084.
right.
And that's the number I wanted y'all to come out and say out loud, because that's really what needs to be out here on the form.
Actually, it's not the accurate number based on the new work that was done.
Let's hear what the accurate number is.
The 6th accounting, I won't call it final, for water is 8397 factually. For wastewater, it is 9,065. When this was reanalyzed and taken a look at, water came down to 8157, and wastewater came out to, let's see, is that 8691? I didn't bring my magnifying glass.
This is 8691.
8691. So basically, we have a variance of 240 on water and 374 on wastewater. Okay, that's the difference of where we are today.
So you're giving me the total build out number.
As of now, it changes annually. Okay, right. It also, when you take a look, and I sent this to David, I couldn't send it to everybody for this meeting for obvious reasons, but when you look at the last, it's called the 10th supplemental agreement between the SGRA and MUD 46. There are inconsistencies based on this number and the research that was done here that I think is more accurate. I haven't had time to study it because I just got this from Shelley and Eric this week. So I don't know, but it talks about the cost on a per SFDUE basis, which is intriguing because it allows us now to benchmark what we paid for it back in 2016, was it? Whatever it was, whenever we did it, and to what we're actually getting. So if we wanted to take a look, we could go back between the 6th accounting and the variance to today, how much money did we get? And the answer is probably close to zero because we get it on new revenue going forward once the SDFUE is set up. So we can now benchmark and determine, are we getting full coverage of the money that we spent, which is, let's see, 600,000? Forgot.
A little bit out of scope for what we need today.
Yeah, yeah.
Let me just say this.
Well, I think,
I'll just say this quickly.
okay.
So there is a 6th accounting, right? In it, there is a list of SFDUs. For whatever reason, I don't think anybody's, kept track of how many we might have consumed and not consumed.
Right.
So that's another issue for another day.
It's an issue. The point is facts that we get to determine how well we're managing our business.
I agree with you, but there's no way we can resolve that question today.
No, we're not going to. It's just, we need to pass this around too.
This number that we see on these documents is sort of fluid because I don't think
That's
we,
okay, because
That's
I
okay.
understand how.
Yeah, it's kind of,
And that projections.
it's kind
are
of
done.
up in the air.
But we need to know what this number is. What are we claiming is fully built out today and where are we today?
we've got excess capacity.
I know,
Bottom line.
But no,
That's
but
okay.
You
That's
have
what
that,
we're-
you have that letter, right? You put a number in that letter. Is that the,
Well, that was from LGA on the, you're talking about on the exhibit, and I don't
That's
know
what I'm
where y'all
looking at.
ended up, honestly, after y'all went through it. I don't know where you ended up on those numbers and had those validated with LGA to have that exhibit.
Well, this document was the basis of everybody's input, correct?
Mhm.
I mean, it was your input, it was that advisor consultant, and it was the engineering firm. So this is an accurate number because it's been proved by 3 separate organizations. We're merely the recipient of it. We have no judgment on it. We don't know if it's right or wrong. We're accepting this to be fact, and it's more accurate than the 6th accounting. That's the key point. So we've got the benchmark on the 6th accounting. We have the reanalyze numbers here, and we've got an excess, which allows us to build more if we want to. We've already paid the SGRA. So,
He's already there. And
Yes.
This is about what capacity, that 95 threshold,
Exactly.
what
Yeah.
capacity has not yet been constructed.
Correct.
To meet your projected full build out.
and it varies.
so Fred, since you have the document with you, why don't you choose those 2 numbers? And
Why don't I what now?
on this letter that requires 2 numbers, you mean, and we read the numbers. We
So
said,
what I got from Wilson was that we have 7799 SFDUEs constructed, 285 projected but not constructed, and a total of 8,084.
I don't know where those numbers came from.
I got them from Wilson. I talked to him today.
Okay, well, this is one of the things that I keep bringing up. We need to have every document stated who gave it, when it was done,
Right.
and what the source material was. This is the most recent document that I will go with only because 3 separate groups looked at it and approved it.
I think the magnitude is about the same.
It swings about 5 to 8%. I would not consider that small. I consider that pretty
So we're
significant.
we don't have a resolution that's accurate, correct? To even consider.
Well,
The-
you gotta,
I
the
mean,
decision you make for develop versus developing drives what your flexibility is, what your discretion is on, getting
Right.
notice from your tax rate.
Right.
So we
But
agree on that.
are we agreed on? So we just need to vote on developed status.
And this is the document that we base it on, correct?
So that's the document that.
Okay, this is the document we base it on. Okay,
Okay, so moving forward. Is it safe for me to make a motion to adopt the resolution that the district status is now developed?
Like, you've
we've
got,
already done it.
Based on the research that you two have done,
so let me
do
ask
we? hang-
one question. So we're gonna, let's say we vote today. This number, where's that memo you have? This number that's on this letter that you're gonna reproduce and have one of us sign probably this memo. I mean, you're gonna want that document signed, and it has spots for these 2 numbers. So I don't think we know exactly, we probably need to huddle and choose those 2 numbers. Can we do that after we vote?
I mean, if
You
y'all
can.
come to the conclusion that we're past 3.5, we're
We're
past
into 3.5.
95%, then y'all can do that afterwards. That's fine.
We just need to choose a number.
Okay,
Yeah,
so we'll pass the resolution, we'll fill out the detail later, okay.
We can just do that.
I'll second it.
All right, thank you very much. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor? Opposed? Okay, the item passes. Thank you. Item 11, we have a financial advisor's recommendation. All right, we have David Wood here. He works with Brian.
Happy to be here tonight, David Wood, to talk to you all about your tax rate for the 2023 tax year. Now that we are a developed district, and know that to be the case, we can go about setting our tax rate. So we've got a number of things to discuss, kind of want to review the process to set our tax rate each year, that 2-step process that we're familiar with. Then we'll look into the numbers, and our taxable values and our cash flows, that, back up our recommendation for the 2022 tax year. Then since that recommendation for this year is largely dependent upon the numbers on this worksheet, I think we're probably gonna have to delve into what all this worksheet entails and, how that, how that affects what our recommendation. So.
Your group did that worksheet, right? That he's referring to.
Jeannie, well. Jeannie and I,
David, yeah,
Okay.
did it.
Okay, good.
Okay, all that said, so two-step process tonight, the goal is to determine the total tax rate that we will include in our notice of public hearing that we'll publish between this meeting and next meeting. Next meeting, step 2, conduct the public hearing and levy the tax rate. So, but what's important, the tax rate that goes in the notice is the maximum that we can levy when we have that public hearing and levy the rate. That's without starting the process over again, which nobody wants to do. We want to go ahead and get our tax rate done for this year. So what we're talking about tonight is a maximum tax rate. So that's that there. Okay, so some numbers. Let's look at our recommendation. Hope everybody has a copy. Looks like this. There was one in your packet. I did hand out a separate one before the meeting in which I changed one number, and that is the maintenance and operations tax rate to balance the budget, which is on page 2, which we'll get to in a second. But just want to clarify that what's in the packet is, for all intents and purposes, the same as what I handed out. So, okay, so 2023 taxable values, the information we got from the appraisal district, including an estimate, conservative estimate for the amount of value that will ultimately be assigned to those properties that remain under protest as of certification of the tax rolls for 2023. We're showing a total 2023 net taxable value of $4,451,540,958. That represents an increase over your 2022 taxable value of about 6.7% or $279 million or so. Last year, our 2022 taxable value was $4,172 million. Based on that value, last year, 2022, we levied a total tax rate of 18.9 cents in total. Of that 18.9 cents, we put 2.9 cents to maintenance and operations, and the remainder 16 cents to debt service. So now with our 2023 taxable values in hand, we have new values to consider and a new tax rate to consider. So we are recommending a total tax rate for 2023 at 18.7287 cents. And of that total, we're recommending that 2.728 cents go towards maintenance and operations in your budget. And then the remainder, 16 cents for debt service. I'll note that 16 cents, same as last year. And so a slight decrease year over year in total tax rate, but an increase in revenues overall because, the decrease in tax rate was relatively less so than the increase in taxable value.
And on balance, for all of the residents of MUD 46, it comes out to maybe $10 a month about.
$10 a month. Yeah, so it's an $85 annual increase for a homestead. So,
So it's more like $8. But
yeah.
I can defend that to constituents. It's $2 a week. Live with it.
Costs are going up and that's gonna help.
And the truth is, they'll tell you.
I'm sorry?
It's not a problem.
It's not a problem. No, I agree with you.
They have told me that.
Good.
Okay, so again, 18. Service cash flow for the 16 cents. You look towards the middle of this cash flow, second row, you have our new taxable value, the 4.45 billion, 16 cents on that value, 99% tax collections generates about 7,050,000 in tax revenue to make your debt service payments. Your debt service payments during calendar 2024 total around $8 million. So this will be another year where we've had a healthy debt service fund balance, and every year we're drawing it down. The difference in, I think, this year and last year is that thanks to the increase in value, that 16 cents is sufficient to give us what I would call sufficient coverages through the life of the debt structure. And I would define sufficient coverages as a minimum of 25%. So right, coverage being the ending fund balance in the debt service fund as a percentage of the debt service obligations next year. So we have that, right? We are pulling it down, but again, as was discussed earlier, we don't have that many more years of debt service payments to make, at least on our outstanding bonds currently. So 16 cents is what gets us there to the end in 2030. Okay, below the cash flow there, three boxes. The top box has some information about M&O rates. Last year, 2.9 cents, 99% tax collections. Last year's value generated about $1.2 million in maintenance tax revenue. This year, a slight reduction in the proposed M&O rate, 2.7287 cents, 99% tax collections on this year's 2023 value. Again, about $1.2 million for your budget. I'm showing that based on the last version of the budget from Maureen, that we only need 1 cent to balance our budget. But as was discussed, we have relatively low coverages in the operating fund. And to the extent where I think we can increase them and generate a surplus this year, I think that'd be great. So that's the reason for our recommendation of the M&O tax rate. The middle box there is some information on average homesteads in the district and their tax bills. The average homestead value last year, 496,880. That value, last year's rate generated a tax bill of $939. Average homestead value for 2023. What we're showing is 546,547. At the proposed total rate, that would equate to a tax bill on the average homestead of $1,024 or an $85 increase annually, but in percentage terms, a 9% increase. And you may say, well, that 9% increase is more than 3.5%. And I would agree. And that would lead us to the next part of our conversation, which revolves around the particular tax rates that we must, as a developed district, calculate, right? So you'll see the final two rows there in the bottom box. The second to last row, the 2023 mandatory tax election rate. That is 17.7839 cents. The mandatory tax election rate on our comptroller worksheet here is the tax rate that generates a 3% increase in the tax bill of the average homestead. And I'll go ahead and define. There's also the 2023 voter approval tax rate. That tax rate is the M&O tax rate. If you look at just the M&O tax bill that an average homestead got last year, you increase that by 3%, apply it to the new average homestead value. What's the new 3.5% increase M&O rate? It's that rate plus whatever debt rate we decide it to be for a given year. And that equates to your voter approval rate. Okay, so I'll pause for a second.
Yeah, and let me just kind of add a little color to that. So when this bill is passed, I guess
2019 came into effect.
yeah, Senate Bill 2. The idea, there was a lot of talk about how do we slow down increases in taxes. And we still hear about that, talked about that this time. There was a lot of things kicked around. One was limits on appraised values and working at it from the appraisal district side. And then what ultimately settled on was working on it from the revenue generation side, regardless of what appraised values end up at, but restricting additional revenue. Well, that sounds great until you think about the fact that districts and a lot of other entities issue what we call general obligation debt, meaning they issue bonds that are backed by property taxes that are levied without limitation as to rate or amount. So if you're trying to restrict revenue, you can't create a new law that would bust the general obligation, or else we'd have skyrocketing interest rates because the bonds would be a lot more risky and you potentially have defaults. So the way they skinned the cat was to say, okay, we're going to say if you're over the 3.5% on your total revenue, you're going to have you will have to have an election. But if the election doesn't pass, all we're going to make the rate go down on is on the M&O side, not the debt service side.
Right.
So that's how you end up with these two different rates. But you ended up, until this last session, and we had a cleanup provision, you ended up with a ridiculous scenario. It was hypothetical actually until Bud 36 hit it last year, because they didn't have any debt service until last year. Is you can have a situation where you go over, and this is what you're going to do this year, you're going to go over the mandatory tax number, but the election would be pointless because it would only roll it back to a number that was at or lower than the voter approval amount. So up until about a month or so ago, a district had to call an election, which is what MUD 36 had to do, call an election, and then you end up canceling it because it's moot because the result of the election wouldn't change. Y'all don't have to do that because the law was changed. And now if you're under the voter approval number, you don't have to call the election. It's a little convoluted, wish it was cleaner and simpler, but that's why you got these different numbers.
The voter approval number is higher than the mandatory tax collection rate when the debt service component increases year over year relative to the total tax revenue basis rate. So that's why we have that situation this year. And that's why our proposed rate equal to the voter approval rate, which is of course higher than the mandatory tax collection rate, which means the proposed total rate would increase and could increase the tax bill.
So this is good news, the translator, right?
It's good news that the legislation got passed and cleaned up this facility.
That's good.
So basically, we're sitting on top of the maximum M&O rate we could have.
You are at it.
We'll add it.
Yeah, that's
Right
right.
at it.
That's true. But the 3.5% is, not applicable in this.
Good job.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? All right. Again, thank you.
Pass that, publish that rate. I'll make that motion.
Okay,
Second it.
okay. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of publishing the proposed tax rate for MUD 46, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, opposed? Okay, it passes. Okay, item 12.
Evening. I do not have anything on item number 12, unless y'all have any questions, but I do know Connie and Dan do have a presentation.
Very good. You feeling better?
Are you two pages?
I can take it. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I've got-
You got a 3-seat buffer.
All right, so. All right. Make sure we get some stuff. Okay. Let's see if this is gonna get over here this morning. Thank you. All right, well, thanks so much for having us this evening. So Dan and I are here to talk about the AC water line replacement program and condition-based asset management. So if you are familiar with the presentation that was presented to the trustees last week, this is basically the exact same presentation, less a couple of the slides that allow for questions as we go. So just in the benefit of trying to keep time going, if you don't have a copy of this, there are copies here if you need one. But we're gonna ask for questions to be held till the end. It's about a 20-minute presentation. So Dan's gonna take the first 10. I'm gonna take the last 10. We're gonna hit 4 agenda items here. So project plan background of how we got kind of where we are, condition-based asset management, just a discussion of the different types of testings, estuaries recommendations, and our proposed next steps. So with that, Dan, you're up.
Thank you. So starting off project background, I'm going to start in 2017, 2018 timeframe. This is when, we acknowledge that we have aging infrastructure in our system. And internally with STRA, we went through an exercise, the Technical Services Department, along with the Woodlands Division, to start defining, looking at the data we had regarding break history, the age of the existing pipes, and looking at consequence failure at a high level regarding where critical facilities were located along the routes. The best information we had at that time, we utilized to develop replacement cost estimates. That at that period of time was around $100 million. And in 2018 was when we first presented a 10-year project plan that included AC water line replacement projects. Pushing forward to 2019, 2020, acknowledging that this was going to be a significant investment. We had conversations with the audit committee regarding financing, funding, continued conversations with the MUDs, and just from some minor adjustments to the estimated replacement cost due to inflation, the cost went up to $109 million. 2021, 2022, a couple significant items at this time. One was we initiated design of the town center water line. So we brought on a consultant to start that process. We also brought on a third-party consultant to help verify our proposed 10-year project plan and also the cost estimates associated with those. So That consultant worked through a Woodlands Division 20-year water system capital improvement plan. The results of that was a consultant recommended a 10-year replacement program for the AC water lines. And through the best information they had at that point in time, estimated replacement costs of all the AC water lines around $149 million. That study the consultant form cost around $120,000. So another result of that study was, this is the handout we just gave you. It's just really for your reference. There is 11 proposed segments of AC water line project comprising of approximately 48 miles coming out of that study. So on the handout, the different colors essentially represent the 11 different segments. This is similar data more in a table format. Again, the 11 segments listed in priority of how they're currently prioritized for replacement. And data on just the installation year and the number of breaks that have occurred on those line segments since 2000.
So can you hold on that one?
Yeah, go back.
I'm gonna interrupt you with one question.
Why don't you hold the question till the end?
All right.
Okay, thank you, George. And make sure we do come back. with
I'll remember.
First quarter of 2023, we've seen a lot of price escalation in the market on equipment, materials, construction contracts. Do we want to verify our cost estimates going into the development of our most current 10-year project plan? So we hired another third-party consultant, the same consultant that is engaged with us for the design of Town Center water line. We felt they were the most qualified to have the most updated data, talking to local consultants, suppliers, and seeing bid results from other projects similar in the region. So with that, the replacement costs went up to $200 million is the latest estimate. That's what we presented in our 10-year project plan to y'all in April. So a condition-based asset management program. So this has been discussed over the previous months. We want to present, our current understanding and knowledge from what we have discussed with other experts in the area. So focusing mainly on the asbestos cement water pipe at this point, but essentially you can use a condition-based asset management program for other pipe materials. It's something we could potentially utilize down the road when we get to replacing PVC pipes. So since April 2023, we've been presented with and reviewed a number of engineering articles. These are peer-reviewed journal articles across the nation in similar situations to what we're dealing with. We discussed an approach to a conditions-based asset management program with multiple national experts and engineers that some of them have authored those engineering articles. Some of them have authored the AWWA manuals that lay out procedures for condition-based program. We've discussed destructive, non-destructive testing approaches with a number of vendors, the technologies out there that could be utilized, and then also discussed with other municipal entities on what are they doing and when they're presented with similar situations as us in these large capital programs. So just a few that we've talked to is Austin, City of Conroe, City of Baytown, Lake Jackson, Sugar Land, et cetera. So 4 primary pieces of an asset management condition-based program: opportunistic sampling, destructive testing, non-destructive testing, engineering analysis. That will go through the next couple slides. So uncontrolled opportunistic sampling, what is that? That's essentially when pipes break. So recently we've gone through and revised our procedures and our templates that we utilize to collect data during pipe break situation. So that's more technical detail on the actual pipe itself, but also, other aspects of how long was the line down? Was there impacts to traffic? Was there impacts to private property? Cost to repair the line? All that's being captured in our asset management software and also in our GIS. One thing we have discussed to move forward with when pipes break is actually taking those physical pipe samples, sending them off to a laboratory for testing, and you would be able to gain additional data points from that. Opportunistic sampling on the controlled side. This would be essentially if we have an upcoming construction project, we would have the ability to remove some of those pipe samples and send them off for testing. We've talked about the town center water line a lot. That's at a 90% design right now. It's been funded up to this point using R&R funds. We currently do not have funding for construction. One that has been talked about less is a Harper's Landing water line extension. This is essentially a small loop over in Mud 39 east of 45 Trade Center Parkway area. It's really to provide some redundancy within our system. When I say small project, it's around $300,000 estimated for construction. This has been on the 10-year project plan for a number of years, R&R funded, and we have budget for construction. So why that's important and why we're even have it on here is because that new line is going to be tapping into an AC line. And that AC line, one of the 11 segments that is in the overall program to be replaced. So it is an opportunity for us to take that pipe sample where that tap is made and send that off for testing. So destructive testing. For this, we will have to shut down sections of the pipeline, and we would definitely have some sort of temporary water service above ground, maintaining service to the customers. We would propose excavating down, essentially pulling out a segment of joint to joint, about 10 to 13 feet of that asbestos cement pipe, and be able to send that off for testing within a certified lab. We could also bring in geotech experts to look at the soil, the embedment, and the construction around the original pipe. And ultimately, through a number of either chemical or physical tests within the laboratory, you're going to be able to determine what remaining wall thickness there is, strength, hardness, internal, external degradation. Non-destructive testing, the most common one that's been discussed here in terms of technology is an acoustical test, which would take place over approximately 700 feet of the line at a time, connecting sensors to that pipe, running that wave through there, and the velocity of that wave over that 700 feet essentially would be transmitted back to an average stiffness and degradation of the pipe. So something to think about though, is there's pros and cons to both destructive and non-destructive testing. Also pros and cons of the technologies out there, but non-destructive testing, you're getting an average over a segment of pipe. There's possibility that average could be skewed if you got one spot in that pipe that is really bad and the rest of it is in good condition. Destructive side, that is a very distinct sample at one small location where is that representative for the larger segment. So again, pros and cons to think about on the data that would be collected through non-destructive or destructive testing. Engineering analysis, you're going to have that up front and on the back end. We need an expert to come in and help lay out this program in more detail for us. How much testing do we do? What type of testing? And all of that. So then on the back end, you're going to have all this additional data. How do we analyze that? What do we do with that? What is it that's going to tell us? A common practice is putting it into a predictive model. There will be no longer just the metrics of pipe age and break history. You're going to have a number of different metrics that go into a calculation for a likelihood of failure. How do you weight those different metrics? Is there trigger points associated with them of when you would say, all right, it is time to replace the pipe? All that would have to have some assistance to help us go through and analyze from an engineer that we would bring on board. Ultimately, it's leading to a revised, prioritized plan for the AC water line segments to be replaced and a schedule associated with that. So that I want to pass it off to Connie. She's going to talk a little bit more about proposed testing, the amounts, and some recommendations that we have.
All right, thanks, Dan. So how much testing should we do? How many of the destructive, non-destructive? And so we've had lots of conversations with some of these experts. So 3 or 4 of them across the United States, and some who've done local stuff, some who've done more national. And really, how do you bracket it to kind of help come up with a budget and what should a plan be? So we looked at it from a maximum destructive, maximum non-destructive limits. And so 1 sample per mile was a good rule of thumb that we were kind of given, is what you could consider to utilize. So if you don't include town center, so town center being about 3 miles of pipe, there's an overall 48 miles in the 11 projects. So that would be 45 miles. That's 45 total locations. So if you go back to that map that Dan showed you, Don't hold us to the locations of these red dots. This is just for schematic purposes. But this is what 45 testing locations would look like. I just want to note that town center is down here in this green. And that is the area. There's no testing shown there, but that's just for your reference. And just in case you're curious, the map is twisted and north is to your right. Additionally, from a maximum non-destructive, there's not really a clear rule of thumb. But if you do not include town center, once again, so removing that 3 miles of pipe, from some of the experts, what they've sort of told us is a good recommendation would be 25 miles of that 45-mile pipeline should be maximum amount tested. What that looks like is the black squiggles on the screen. So don't hold me to which pipelines we would test, but this would generally show you about what 25 miles could look like. Lastly, the engineering analysis. For any testing and analysis that we do, we're going to need some engineering assistance. And so we're going to need an analysis done for all of the work that we would do. So what is SJRA's recommendation? So you've got these maximum numbers. You're going to have an engineering analysis for whatever it is that we do. Some of the consultants that we talk to, they would say do non-destructive first, then do, destructive afterwards. Some of them would flip it. Some would say do more destructive. So we kind of came to a conclusion with the group that half destructive, half non-destructive would give us a good budget number. And once we kind of get a consultant on board, it would help us, and they could really help us know whether that's correct or not. But at the end of the day, the result of all of that analysis and testing would be a prioritized and scheduled project plan. Now, what would that look like from a layout if you took the red dots and the black squiggles and put them back on that map? You have some areas where you may just have red dots. You have some areas where you may just have black squiggles, and you have other areas that may combine the two together. And that's something that a consultant will help us be able to determine. So George, I think this was the question that you had on this, and we'll come back to this again for your question. But I want to note here that this is the prioritized project plan from that 2021-2022 study. And it was never really meant to be a stagnant document. It's something that we will continue to update. The number of breaks will change every year. And so the hope is when we gather more data, it will allow for us to reprioritize this plan. The replacement years could shift up or back. The number of breaks will change and the projects may shuffle of where they go. But at the end of the day, this is really the deliverable that we want to receive from the consultant. So with that, as part of SJRA's recommendation, we do need a consultant to help us. And so we are proposing a condition-based assessment RFQ, one for consulting engineer, one for a contractor, because we got to have somebody help us dig the holes and put in the temporary water, and then a testing lab. So we need those 3 qualified professionals to help us. So how long should it take and how much are we proposing it's going to cost? An estimated schedule is about 4 years. And so that's from beginning to end to get that deliverable of the updated list of projects. You can prioritize some of the ones that are already on the priority schedule that we have from 2021, 2022. And we would propose to probably do that to where we can double check what we're doing, but 4 years is really the estimate. Estimated cost, $3.5 million. And so that includes everything. So engineering analysis, contractor to excavate pits, geotechnical, destructive testing, non-destructive. So everything that we're aware of at this point should be included in that $3.5 million. So the next steps that we're proposing here is any opportunistic testing for future breaks, we're going to do better at gathering that data. And we've got, as Dan noted, the forms that we're updating even today. So we're committed to doing that on behalf of the SJRA and the Woodlands Water Authority. Discuss the condition-based, that's what we're here to doing today at the August board meetings. So this next, we left in here as it was presented to the trustees, but we want to note a bit of a change from the trustees of how this needs to be presented. So at the September MUD meetings, for the MUDs to consider and take action is actually going to shift to at the October MUD meeting, the MUDs are to consider and take action. In September is really giving you all a month to process this information and ask us any questions you may have in September. So a discussion more in September, and then the MUDs will vote in October on a $25 million bond, which is broken down to $15.5 million for the construction of town center that we will be proposing to do opportunistic testing. So there's already going to be pits open where different pipelines are going to need to be pulled out. So we'll test some of that. The next is the preliminary engineering for the next 2 prioritized projects. So $2 million a piece for those. And the thought process with this is kind of 2 parallel tracks. So the majority of the folks that we've talked to wouldn't necessarily slow down and quit moving forward with your investment in infrastructure replacement as you do D for the condition-based assessment. You want to keep moving forward, but have two parallel tracks of condition-based assessment, go gather more data, and then also be continuing to replace infrastructure. And so with that and the $2 million of CAPI, that adds up to $25 million. And so that is our presentation. We're going to go back to the next steps as the place to stop. And George, what is it that you wanted to ask? We'll start there for questions.
I have a couple of questions. First one is y'all were talking about destructive testing being taken out a whole segment of pipe. Earlier, y'all had talked about taking plug samples. You know, I pictured, you know, drill out a plug and analyze that rather than, you know, analyze a whole section of pipe where you could, I think y'all had said, drill a plug and then plug the hole. So you didn't have to do this major project to get a destructive sample.
And so, yes, sir, that's something that we've talked to some of the experts about. And the thought with going joint to joint is you're able to see what the construction is of that area. And so pull that piece of pipe out and replace it, because once it's disturbed, we wouldn't want to leave it alone there in the hole. So you want to see from joint to joint, which is about 13 feet long.
Which is a major project every time.
Yes, sir.
Guess in my heart, I come from a big chemical company, and this is a big project. You got a $200 million project, and I'm surprised you aren't going and finding a reliability engineer to have on your staff to oversee this rather than bring in a consultant.
It's
I'm
something
looking
that
at
when you talk to like the city of Austin, for instance, they're a very large utility. They have 2 or 3 people that this is some of what they manage. They're on the maintenance, but they also do some of this asset management.
This is a big project.
You get into other cities and that are like a Baytown size, and they really don't have much at all that they do in any destructive testing or non-destructive testing. So it just depends on how y'all want for us to manage it. I mean, if y'all want us to bring a FTE to the table, yeah, I mean, that's a
Okay.
consideration.
Can I ask some questions? Can we go back to the town center line? What is the construction methodology for the town center line?
It is a collection of open cut, auger boring, HDD, and pipe bursting.
Okay, so the EPA requirements and regulations do not allow for pipe bursting of AC pipe. The methodology, and this falls under EPA regulation. So that goes to my next question of what regulatory agencies have you gotten to review and sign off on the plan? Number 2, I mean, EPA regulations, you cannot do pipe bursting. So the recommended methodology, or the only regulated methodology, is for trenchless, for non-invasive, is a closed tolerance pipe slurification.
So there's a document that you're referring to.
Yeah.
That was from the Vermont DOT that's published.
Mhm.
And we are following up on that right now, Deidre, because
Okay.
it came out in April of 2022. But it's something that is changing, but recently in the state of Texas, it has not been required. So we are talking and we're discussing some of that, and the plans are headed to TCQ with this next round. As a rehabilitation, you're not required to necessarily submit to TCQ. It's conversations we're actually actively having right now.
Okay, so pipe replacement is considered a renovation activity under the asbestos NESHAP.
HAP.
And the approved alternative was approved by the EPA in May of 2019. So I was just like a follow-up on that. And, you know, I understand completely that you're saying Texas doesn't require it, but I believe this falls under the EPA's jurisdiction just based on those standards. So we kind of need a written follow-up regarding that.
Deidre, that's, you're talking about the construction of the line and removal of the old line. Is that?
The methodology that is allowable is, I mean, I'm not very familiar with it. From what I understand is you have to keep the AC pipe wet and they have to vacuum out.
Right, you have to cut it as you cut it and take it out, right?
Yeah, you have to vacuum it out so that you're not leaving it within the soil. So pipe bursting would leave it within the soil.
So it's a
Um,
hazardous material type environment, suits and a little,
Yeah,
little
I was-
bill.
I would want written follow-up on that.
Actively looking at that right now, DJ.
Okay. What water quality testing is being done in the distribution system in the AC pipe area?
Whatever TCEQ or EPA requires.
Every 9 years.
For asbestos,
Yeah, like, what are you testing in this distribution
in the
system?
distribution of the wholesale system, it's a long list. It's on the Drinking Water Watch. It's in the CCR that's recently provided by the MUDs. But asbestos is once every 9 years. Last test sample was just under 0.2, limit 7.
So you went through, and you do not have to respond to this today. I just have several questions about the pipe testing and how you're going to go about what it exactly is being tested for. What will the result have to be? Will they come out and say, okay, you've got another 50 years useful life on this? And is there a way that you would manage the whole project to say, okay, we have 50 years on this segment, we don't need to replace it right now? And because I know you're going to do a combination of testing versus getting the plans ready. So would you, if you have the plans ready, would you just say, okay, we don't need to do this line?
Right. I think that all of those are really valid questions, Deidre. If you've got a list like that, get them to Eric. I would say just my gut on that is we're gonna need that expert that we've subbing an RFQ for to be able to determine what that process is. We're not
Okay.
qualified.
I will submit all my questions.
Appreciate that.
We could provide, what we know and, kind of the full list of tests that could potentially get what be the output of that, but in terms of what we would actually do, that's more, we would get an expert on board.
Yeah, I would just want to know what the output is.
Right.
Oh,
Okay, so I guess we're gonna have a month of asking questions,
It's got some questions.
submitting, okay.
So if we go back to your last slide. So you have this interest in this town center line. What is that interest? Why is that held out the way it is?
The 3A.
Like
It is
3A?
a critical piece of infrastructure that has had failures. And it is in the commercial part and the vital part of the Woodlands. And so that is the line that we've gotten to 90%. The previous conversations that have led to this, we've got the design pending some of the comments from Beaver, as well as other review that we have. It's to a point to where we can move forward with construction and we
Is
can
it
gain.
because that is mentioned before in the trustee meeting that there's a need for capacity expansion?
So there's a piece of it on 6 Pines. That, yes, there is a piece that we would be moving from, I believe, 12 to 16 inch. And I don't know if you want to comment on that, but yeah, so there's a portion of it that we were proposing to replace anyway, and we're just gonna upsize it while we're at it.
And how much would that be? If you looked at the $15.5 million, how much would that segment be that you needed?
I actually could not tell you that. off
I
the
mean,
top of my head.
I mean,
I don't even want to ballpark, David.
I guess what I would say, the capacity portion, we usually cover that by the 6th accounting, right? The Metro Mud would pay for that if they wanted a capacity expansion. And I think that, that's gonna be the issue.
The cost will be allocated to the MUD.
Metro Mud to which the capacity is needed. That's how.
If the capacity is based on an SFUE increase or a development, then yes, it is. But if it's an operational capacity, then no, it is not. This need is a capacity need for an operational need.
Oh,
It is not a growth and development.
but doesn't the growth and development tax the current infrastructure? Because you've got diameter of pipes X and now you're going to that much, correct? Okay, so that's a function of the growth of our community.
But the growth is.
It's not a direct correlation, but if we're drawing more SFDUEs, it's obviously siphoning off.
I agree. It's just like if a restaurant usually has 10 and now they have 20 people come through, you're using the water.
I'm agreeing with you.
This is more of a bottleneck type issue with the main pressure line between our one water plant and our elevated storage tank.
So the costs are being allocated except in the case where it's an operational.
Correct, just like.
But if the operational is also dependent on the growth of the community and the taxing of our infrastructure that we planned for 30 years ago, we have to accommodate that. And my only question then would be, in previous meetings some 6-8 months ago, I brought up the subject of impact fees to those organizations that are driving this growth. Growth is good, but not always good, okay? All I'm suggesting is that I think we need to take a look at either some methodology to more fairly allocate the costs by MUD individually, and also a way of dealing with that shortfall of capital. We shouldn't necessarily be funding all of that, is all I'm saying. Oh, you shouldn't be funding all of that, I'm suggesting. And we've not really gone down the path of impact fees. And several months ago, and I think I brought this up, I called probably 8 or 10 master community general managers to find out what they're doing. And their phrase was using an inflection point. And their inflection point ran anywhere from 80 to 95%. If focusing only on 46, we're at 95. We've got certain areas of growth, certain annex opportunities. I would like to think that our fellow MUD directors would be going to their constituents and saying, hey, we're an aging infrastructure. We're getting significantly more growth, and I'm focusing more on Town Center and Harper's Landing and the like. It's time that we've got to allocate these costs to the users of it. And I don't hear any mechanism to do that.
So the concept of additional capacity and those charges being attributable to a specific district is triggered when a district says, I've got a new development that wasn't anticipated by the sixth and final, or is going to be larger than that, and I need more capacity than what the sixth and final provided for whatever they bought since then of excess capacity. And that capacity cannot be provided. Those additional SFDUs can't be provided unless there are expansions of the system.
Correct.
Then that district that's requesting the capacity has to pay full freight for whatever expansions or additional facilities are necessary to provide the capacity.
I'm not disagreeing with that. I understand that's the process. My question is, the other shoe that needs to drop is, okay, we're asking for this additional funding. We're gonna get a revenue bond to do that. And we're going to incur debt for X years, call it 30 years. How is that being passed along to the users of the water and wastewater system? And I don't hear any answer to that.
May I make a suggestion?
Sir.
Tonight, we're talking about conditional assessment. We're not talking about actually going and building it. We're still a year away from going to construction, assuming it's approved. Can we stick to a conditional assessment?
Yes, sir.
Get that resolved?
Absolutely.
Because that's the driver of being able to go forward on construction.
Okay,
So-
we're not even
So
gonna,
back to the slides, just a minute. If you take the data, so I did a Freedom of Information Act request. They gave me all the data they had for 8 years. And if you look at the cost for repair for 8 years on AC pipe, it's roughly $43,000 a year. So we're talking about originally spending 18 million a year to eliminate a $43,000 problem. And then if you do the standard calculation of AWWA is breaks per 100 miles. And if I do that calculation, I get, I got 5 breaks per 100 miles for us. And if you look at Mesa, they got 4.5, and they say that the recommended service level for AWWA is like 13. But if you take Connie's information that was on that chart, she goes out and after the information they replied, then 2 days later, they have more data going back, I guess, by hand. Dan, you collected it, like you said, and they go out another 13 years. Well, that number brings you, below 5, meaning there's less breaks per year with that. So we're sitting with 5 breaks per mile. It doesn't seem like we need to rush on anything. And I think the consideration we should give is that we set up a conditional testing program and learn from that, and just, those plans you have can be put on the shelf. they're not gonna rot. You know, it's not like a lemon.
I would also say, David, just to clarify, and I think we do, our
Yeah.
time is up here. But when you.
No, they don't-
Any of the materials, a lot of those is for distribution systems. Ours is a version of a transmission system. It's not completely a transmission system. I wouldn't call it a transmission system. But it also really does clearly state that when you get into a situation where you've got a transmission line, some of those metrics don't really apply because the risk of which you could have failure in the area of a hospital or dialysis center, things like that, downtown commercial, that actually can trump based on what the policymakers want to do. So
So what I would ask is, and we've asked this before, I love written stuff, you mean? And, you know, I've been digging through the thing. So when you say these things, I'd like to see the literature. I can read it, you know what I mean? That's 77, right? That's tied to water main conditional testing, not small line, water main. And so I'd like to see that, you know, so, you know, I've looked and read everything I could find, but I'm like a sponge. So if you want to move me, you move me with numbers. Something like some peer reviewed, and I've seen the Vermont article, you mean, but that didn't really apply. That applied for building. And so I'd love to see it. I really would. And you would move me if you could demonstrate. But so far, everything I read says, you know, it's not 50 years, it's 70, 80, 90, 100.
Some number larger, but we don't know what that number is.
We don't know what that number is, but if you do condition testing, we will.
All right, well, tonight we're only receiving their briefing, so let's move along. I understand. Mud 47, do they record their meetings? Mud 36, do they record?
No.
Okay, then shouldn't they move upstairs? Because we're required to,
They're posted to meet here, though.
Supposed to be here.
okay.
Yeah.
So then our meeting won't be completely televised. Okay, so I'm gonna make a motion that we adjourn temporarily and move upstairs.
The meetings.